So why was Kiren Rijiju suddenly removed, such a high-profile law minister? What's the backstory? Let's try and find out how his tenure is being seen. Aman Lekhi, senior advocate and a former additional solicitor general, and Biswajit Bhattacharya, also senior advocate and a former additional solicitor general. To you first, Biswajit Bhattacharya, lots of stories doing the rounds. Do you think that Mr. Rijiju was removed because he confronted the Supreme Court over the collegium system, and it was getting more and more difficult, therefore, to have a working relationship between the executive and the judiciary?
Primarily, that is correct, Rajdeep. Apart from that, there is a concept called litigation management, which is controlled by an agency called the Central Agency, located in the precincts of the Supreme Court. And the law ministry is directly responsible for that. So there has been an utter failure of litigation management in the Supreme Court. And when I say management, it is in the overall context, how you argue before the court, how you place and all that. And there is a lot of expectation by the political executive these days. Two adverse orders on 11th of May by two scintillating constitution bench judgments, which Supreme Court delivered, tellingly went against the government.
You're referring to the Delhi LG case. One was the Delhi versus LG case, which is the second, correct. The Maharashtra case. Correct.
Delhi versus LG case and also the Maharashtra case. This reflects the independence of the judiciary. In my view, the judiciary, Indian judiciary, has risen to its highest stature by delivering these two judgments on the same day. And buck stops with the law ministry, and the entire law ministry's top echelons have been washed out today. Plus, Kiren Rijiju, the honorable minister, has been making irresponsible statements attacking the majesty and sanctity of the Supreme Court and judiciary and the collegium system and the NJAC system, in which I happen to be a petitioner in person in the Supreme Court, and to say that the Supreme Court is being converted into an opposition party and all that, and to say before a two-judge bench, and to say when the two-judge bench was going on, Rajiv, just bear with me for a minute, that don't tell us that we are sitting over the file. If you think that we are sitting over the file, don't refer the file to us, do it yourself, run the show. Now this is crossing all limits. No cabinet minister can afford to make this statement and annoy the judiciary, confront the judiciary.
So you think that Mr. Rijiju crossed the limits. But my question will be, Aman Lekhi, Mr. Rijiju couldn't have done it without some a nod of approval from his higher-ups. When he, for example, was taking on the judiciary over the collegium system, he's been doing it for the last 7-8 months. What suddenly changes for him to be removed?
I agree with you completely, Rajdeep. I disagree with Vishwajit on this account. Rijiju was given to flying off the handle and hitting the roof and virtually sending things haywire. But in the system as we are in presently, I don't think any minister in this government has got the character, the capacity to speak his mind without having the nod of his political superior. So whatever Rijiju would be saying would be basically having the endorsement of those in the government under whom he is working, because I don't think he would have the independence to speak his own mind. So I do not think that it's because of what he said that he's removed, because he's been saying that with a fair amount of consistency, and he's not the only person who's been saying it. There have been others in the political establishment who have been actually saying the same thing. So I think it's too simplistic to say that he's been removed for that reason, because I don't see any link between that. I also do not see any link between the two Supreme Court judgments and his removal, because if that is going to be the test, then the lawyers who have been arguing that particular matter, there have to be some kind of comment about that, including the law officers who appeared in it. And the outcome of litigation is not something which can ever be controlled, and you cannot hold the executive responsible for judicial outcomes, because that is the domain of the judiciary alone.
No, but using words like anti-India gang, to describe those who are critics of the government, should a law minister be doing that, virtually accusing retired judges of being part of an anti-India gang? Do you think that Mr. Rijiju was an example of someone who crossed the line? law ministers are expected to maintain a certain Lakshman Rekha.
He crossed the line many times over, and he continued to cross the line, and he was completely unapologetic about crossing lines, and he was allowed to cross lines.
He was allowed to cross the line.
He's been silent for the past some time. He's been removed and he's been silent.
Very interesting.
I mean, it's quite obvious he's allowed to cross the line.
Very interesting.
Of collective responsibility.
Very interesting.
This is a principle of collective responsibility. I mean,
Right.
you can't possibly. I do not think anyone in this government can actually speak whatever the person feels, unless, of course, is assured that the speaking would not have adverse consequences, and adverse consequences did not visit him as long as he spoke. And it's not as if it's now when he had a very temperate approach to the whole thing and said that there is absolutely nothing wrong between the executive and judiciary, that is removed. I see absolutely no link between his intemperate and absolutely unrestrained and uncontrolled.
So then why was he removed, Mr. Lekhi? Well, this is the second law minister who has been removed. Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad was removed 2 years ago. No one is quite certain why. Now we've got Mr. Rijiju, who wasn't even a practicing advocate, removed.
Exactly. You know, that is the biggest problem here. You have a person not a practicing advocate, not familiar with the court routine, is not aware of how the whole thing functions, apparent from the way in which he speaks, because he didn't even have a modicum of knowledge of elementary legal principles when he spoke, and now he's being replaced by a person who's a career bureaucrat and whose only qualification to be a law minister is an LLB degree. And there's much more you need to know as a lawyer that is beyond an LLB degree, because a theoretical understanding of law doesn't equip you to practice it. So the choice is inexplicable. What makes the government choose and then drop and then replace is something which is completely opaque and incapable of any any lucid understanding.
Okay, we are hearing very harsh words in a way.
What is happening?
Okay, from both Mr. Lekhi. Final word to you, Vishwajit Bhattacharya. Do you believe, therefore, the government should have appointed, if you had to replace Rijiju, appoint someone with the kind of legal weight who could perhaps dialogue with the judiciary across the table, at least on several contentious issues? Now you've got Arjun Ram Meghwal, who's also not a practicing advocate.
He may not be a practicing advocate, but the Mr. Meghwal is known to be a person who is quite suave, and he will not confront the judiciary. And you know, Rajdeep, the main thing that I would agree with my learned friend Aman up to a point. Yes, of course, government allowed him to let loose with all the kinds of statements against the Supreme Court and all that, but he crossed the limit. You see, the moment he crossed the limit, it became very embarrassing for the government, so he had to be removed.
No, but he crossed the limit months ago. He crossed the limits months ago. Why now? He's crossed the limit. Is it that because you said certain judgments have gone against the government is the biggest litigant? It is
these judgments, how the case is presented in a court of law, Rajdeep, government is the biggest litigant.
Yeah, but for that you've got to blame the Attorney General and the Solicitor General. Why should the Law Minister take the blame for that?
But the buck stops the Law Minister, central agency, he comes directly under the control of the Law Ministry. That's why both the ministers have been washed out. This is the first time one complete ministry, the Cabinet Minister and the Minister of State, both have been removed unceremoniously, abruptly at the same time, and given an earth science portfolio which is virtually a huge...
Okay, he's been brought down to earth. Let's not be too harsh on the minister. He's someone who's been an ever-smiling presence. Otherwise, he was a very good sportsman. He was a very good sports minister. Maybe we need the right people for the right job. He was a very good sports minister. As law minister, sadly, much more controversial. But for now,
there is no doubt about it.
Yeah, Aman Lekhi and Vishwajit Bhattacharya, appreciate your joining us.